one of the things you got to look at, the biggest connection is the fact that the zodiac astrology as we see it today, in some ways, is not like how it used to be. And I mean that as far as, tarot card readings and people looking at the horoscope every day. That wasn't what it was for in ancient times. So, we're going to start out by getting into that and understanding the ancient way, which is the real way. So go back during ancient times, many civilizations we can see talked about the stars, talked about the zodiac, talked about beings coming down, and everything had to do with the universe and do with the constellations or what have you. And it's something that we can't ignore, when we go and look. So we see the Indians, the Native Americans, was really obsessed with constellations, namely the Pleiades, and the ancient Egyptians as well. And a lot of things was done based upon, these star signs and the zodiac all over the world. We find it, different cultures, different countries, different animals. So we know when we see something like that, it has to be something to it. So just like we find pyramids all around the world, we find the zodiac all around the world. So it's something that we can't ignore. And we have to look at, what that's about. So we know today, everybody gets into horoscopes. Everybody wants to know how to feel today, what to do today, what their future is going to be, so on and so forth. And you got to be thinking to yourself, how is it that these people can know, certain things? And a lot of times you read your horoscope and it's bang on. And sometimes you read it and it's like, that's not me. And we have to understand, how does that work? Really think about it. How would that be possible for somebody to look at a chart or look at the constellations and determine your mood or what you should do with your life? Like, how does that connect? How does that equate? So this is what we're going to get into in this video, to understand how you make that connection between what they call the heavenly bodies and our earthly bodies, our actual bodies. Like, how does that equate? How does that connection work? And when you go and look, it was an essential part, huge part throughout history that just stopped really recently when things started to become more technological. And as we started to grow out of the religious age into this new, political, technological age. And as I talked about before, stuff when the church was coming up was done away with. The old ways was done away with. So anybody that was an alchemist, anybody that was a real philosopher, they was considered, witches or warlocks. And there was people being burnt for being smart or just making a point about the stars or planets. So we had this going on. But when you go back to medieval times, they had this practice to where it was a law that you could not operate or perform certain procedures on a person if you didn't first check with the moon. You had to check for the position of the moon before they would let you operate on the patient, because it was really important back then. And as you'll see in this video, there was a big connection between, religion and astrology back then that a lot of people don't understand. So you couldn't even, give medicine at certain times without checking on the moon. This was a law. It's one of these things they swept under the rug. So this whole thing has to do with medical astrology, and the ancient Egyptians is where you'll find this talked about the most. And we know the Greeks and the Romans will piggyback on it. You can find it in Persia, and the Arabs actually use it as well. So medical astrology, and medical astrology is really based on the four humors. And you'll understand what I call the humors in a second. So you have the four humors, right? So the four humors would be blood. It would be phlegm, mucus, phlegm. You have yellow bile and black bile. These are the four humors. So with the four humors, it's basically dealing with, liquids in the body. And how they understood it back then was these liquids, if they were unbalanced or too much of one or too little of the other, it will cause, mood swings. It will cause you to feel ill. This is how they was able to really look at, and diagnose a person by, these things. Back then they had bloodletting, and they would check your blood, and, Yellow bile has to do with urine, and this is what they would check. We still do the same thing to this day. You have a urinalysis, you have a blood test for them to determine what's wrong with you. But this is what they was doing way back then, medieval times. This was, law that you had to do it this way and check with the moon, because the moon played a pivotal role in whether or not they could figure out what was wrong with you and how to fix the problem. So it says here, although the theory of the four humors does appear in some Hippocratic texts, the Hippocratic writers accepted the existence of only two humors, while some refrained from discussing the humoral theory at all. Humoralism, or the doctrine of the four temperaments, which we're going to get into that in a second, as a medical theory, retained its popularity for centuries, largely through the influence of the writings of Galen. Hippocrates' theory of four humors was linked with the popular theory of the four elements, which we're going to get into this: earth, fire, water, and air, which basically is a big deal when it comes to these, proposed by Empedocles. But this link was not proposed by Hippocrates or Galen, who referred primarily to bodily fluids. While Galen thought that the humors were formed in the body rather than ingested, he believed the different foods had varying potential to act upon the body to produce different humors. Warm food, for example, tended to produce yellow bile, while cold foods tended to produce phlegm. Seasons of the year, periods of life, geographic regions, and occupations also influenced the nature of the humors formed. As such, certain seasons and geographic areas were understood to cause imbalances in the humors, leading to varying types of diseases across time and space. For example, cities exposed to hot winds were seen as having higher rates of digestive problems as a result of excess phlegm running down from the head, while cities exposed to cold winds were associated with diseases of the lungs, acute disease, and hardness of the bowels, as well as ophthalmies, which is issues with the eyes, and nosebleeds. Cities to the west, meanwhile, were believed to produce weak, unhealthy, pale people that were subject to all manner of diseases. In the treatise, Air, Water, Places, and Hippocratic physician is described arriving to an unnamed city where they test various factors of nature, including the wind, water, and soil, to predict the direct influence on the disease specific to the city based on the season and the individual. Diseases could be the result of the corruption of one or more of the humors, which could be caused by environmental circumstances, dietary changes, or many other factors. These defects were thought to be caused by vapors inhaled or absorbed by the body. We're going to talk about that later because you got to think about that. Vapors inhaled or absorbed by the body. Greeks and Romans, and the later Muslim and Western European medical establishments that adopted and adapted classical medical philosophy, believed that each of these humors would wax and wane in the body depending on diet and activity. When a patient was suffering from a surplus of imbalance of one of the four humors, then said patient's personality and or physical health could be negatively affected. So we have the four humors, and the four humors basically split the body, in four parts. So the four humors, then we have the four temperaments. So four humors, four temperaments that corresponds with the four humors. So the four temperaments would be sanguine, then we have choleric, then we have melancholic, then we have phlegmatic. So basically you have, too much blood, you will have, sanguine. And this would basically deal with emotions. So the four temperaments would deal with your emotions. So we always say, you got a crazy temper, your temper. This is where it comes from, the temperaments. So the four temperaments. So now we have this connection with, so far the moon, with our body, this liquid in our body, which we know how the moon reacts to liquid. And then now we have these emotions. So you got, the four humors, and now we have the four temperaments. And then when you have, let's say, too much blood, you have this, sanguine effect, which deals with basically, and not all the effects are bad effects. Understand there's a lot more, but we won't get into the basic ones. So sanguine would basically deal with you being, optimistic in a bad situation. You're not crazy. You're not, too up, too down. You're optimistic and you're positive, right? So we have choleric. And choleric will basically deal with you being, irritated, being in a bad mood. And you have what melancholic basically is sadness and depression. And then you have phlegmatic, which is basically, you being calm. You chill, you calm, you don't really have too much emotions at the moment. You're really unemotional when this happens. So when you have too much blood, you have sanguine. When you have too much yellow bile, that causes the choleric. Black bile would be, of course, melancholic. Note the melon, has to deal with blackness. So black bile. So that's sadness, depression. Of course, they would give us the word shit, black. And then you have phlegm, which would deal with the phlegmatic, which deals with you being calm and, cool. So again, 4 humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, phlegm. And then we have the 4 temperaments. These split the body in 4 parts. Okay. 4 temperaments: choleric, melancholic, phlegmatic, and sanguine. So chart right there, you can see what I'm talking about. And again, the words, we understand these play on words and who's giving us these words. And, we have 4 humors, humor, which you're humorous. Humor has to do with your mood. What type of humor are you in? And then understand, we get the 4 humors. We're talking about BC, talking about 4th century BC. So we get the humors before we get the word human, which we didn't get into the 13th century, the word human. So understand where they got that human from, even though we know hue is like a color. But remember, we talked about yellow bile, black bile, it's colors. We're talking about a time where they're trying to put all this stuff together, and words is just bouncing off each other. And we start tracing words back, you'll see where a lot of them came from. And of course, this stuff will be Greek. So we have the 4 humors and we have the 4 temperaments, and they split the body into 4 parts. These 4 parts also correspond to, 4 elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. So these also correspond with the zodiac, which we'll get into more in a second. So you have this, 4 temperaments, 4 elements, 4 humors, the zodiac, and this would basically give us the Zodiac Man, which this video is basically about the zodiac body. So when you go back in medieval times, this was something that was, it was known. It was something everybody used, understanding the Zodiac Man. So this is where we get, Jesus on the cross of the zodiac. It comes from this. And it's one of the things that if you was around at that time, you would just know. You would be able to make that connection quickly if you was a person that was into astrology and understanding the body in little esoteric circles. These are the people who started to come out when the Bible was introduced, and it was preaching it. And these people was coming out and saying, no, this is astrology, this is that. And these are the people they was killing off, and why they basically just came out and said, well, if you know about astrology, if you know about alchemy and so on and so forth, it's witchcraft, demon worship, because they was making these connections and understanding what this stuff was about. So you have, they show the Zodiac Man on the cross of the zodiac. Jesus was shown the same way. There are too many medieval pictures, paintings of Jesus on the zodiac, as you can see here. He's the sun. Look around him. You have Jesus, you have the zodiac around him, because they understood what he represents and that he's basically you, the Zodiac Man. So much to this. Jesus is you, the Zodiac Man. I talked about how Jesus is your consciousness. God is your all-powerful subconscious. You represent the 12 signs of the zodiac, which are the disciples, which is all of the signs, which is all of us, basically. So this is something, as I said, everybody knew about. They all knew. They all understood what this stuff represented and how it was. The church and astrology back then was connected because, as I said, it was a law for you to understand the moon's position in order for you to practice medicine. You had to know certain things about the body, and you had to understand these things about the zodiac. So the church and the zodiac went hand in hand, and it's, clear when you look at a lot of the medieval churches that stand today. The entryway, when you walk in, they call it the portal. When you walk in, you see the little archway where it's a lot of zodiac carvings there. So it says here, I'm just going to skip down here, and it says, of the zodiac in this religious imagination is echoed by at least 50 extant ecclesiastical buildings featuring exterior sculpted zodiac signs built between 1050 and 1500 across Western Europe. 39 cathedrals, basilicas, abbeys, and churches feature zodiacal sculptures on one or more portals, the majority from 12th century France. Despite the pervasive presence of this motif in medieval art, only about 10% of these zodiac portals have been studied extensively, particularly in relation to one another. This elite 10% of zodiac portals connected with wealthy urban or monastic centers overseen by a powerful group of clergy and aristocrats represent only an oblique keyhole glimpse of this popular image cycle. It is only by taking a comprehensive stance, including relatively minor churches, that a new understanding emerges, specifically a deeper relationship between architecture, zodiac signs, and church portals. Prefaced by the wide scope of the motif and its role in church decorations, it is beneficial to re-examine even the most studied zodiac portals. This study will therefore present new interpretations of zodiac portals by carefully defining medieval astrology and reimagining the zodiac in its medieval context with a clear view of astronomy, processions, and viewership. So it's a clear connection between the zodiac and Christianity, the church or what have you. We understand the moon worship with Islam, the sun worship with Christianity. You can look at the Pope, the hats, the signs, the symbol. It's talking about the sun. The sun and the moon is everything. You can't have one without the other. When you go back during, ancient Egyptian times, any ancient civilization, the sun and the moon is everything. But the Bible is giving you so many hints, as to, I gave you guys examples before about God being the sun and so many different times they pointed out in the Bible. But if you remember, with Jesus is born, the first sign. What is the first sign of the zodiac? Will be Virgo, the virgin. So we have Jesus coming into the world, virgin, virgin birth, Virgo, right? So what does it say in Revelations? The Revelations is talking about him coming back as the Lion of Judah, the lion. What is the last zodiacal symbol? It's Leo, the lion. So Jesus is supposed to come back as the lion, and he's supposed to bring the kingdom of heaven with him and be this Lion of Judah and come back and, so on and so forth. Now, remember, Jesus is talking to Nicodemus, and he's telling Nicodemus about, you can see the kingdom of heaven when you're born again. And Nicodemus is like, what you mean born again? I got to, go back in the womb to be born again. How does that work?